All right, so this is our second time, our second or third time, second or third time, reading from the Cloud of Unknowing. It's a an old Christian writing on contemplative prayer or meditation. And here comes Anila. Anila, just a moment. Let her get comfortable in her chair. All right. And the last thing he was talking about is this importance of focusing our will, right? And he made this reference to Adam and Eve in the garden and the fall. And he was saying, before the fall, all of our love flowed properly toward the divine. And after the fall, when we really entered the world of multiplicity, eating the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, which was really egoism, that idea of identifying ourselves not with the image of God that is within, that God developed, built us around, as it were, but we identify with the physical, with the body and mind. And so we look out through the senses and we see the multiplicity. We find it beautiful. We think that it would be good for food, and we think that it would be fulfilling, that it would make us like God. And so we know, gosh, here comes everybody. Let me just wait a moment here. We think it will make us like God, which is longhand for saying that we look outside of ourselves for our fulfillment. And that by doing that, our will no longer flows in a universal movement toward the beloved, but it splits and it runs through to all of the objects of desire out there in the world. And Ramakrishna addresses that as well and says that really part of our practice is to discern our desires until we see the name of God in them, and we through our discernment, we separate that name of God from that's being reflected in the object, reflected in the world, and we drop the object and go for the divine and get what we're really looking for, not the distraction that is offered by the object that can only fulfill us temporarily for a short time and then leaves us hungry again. Which is where the curse of the Garden of Eden comes from. The idea that all the days of our lives we have to scratch at the dust of the earth to fulfill our desires, because they're always fading away and needing to be rebuilt, refreshed, repurchased as it goes. And so we're out there working 8, 10, 12 hours a day to afford all the things that we are trying to fulfill ourselves with in the world. And so he was talking about returning to that native state through our practice, through prayer, through this contemplative ideal, this practice or this work, as he calls it, of having our mind flow continuously toward the beloved. And so this is where we pick up. He says, God means he fits himself exactly to our soul, of the practitioner rather. He fits himself exactly to our souls by adapting his Godhead to them. And our souls are fitted exactly to him by the worthiness of our creation after his image and in his likeness. Right. So the worthiness of us before the divine is the fact that it is the image of God that is within us. That's what makes us lovable, and that's what makes us loving. Is returning to our true nature as the image of God, and that true nature of God is love, wisdom, and existence. Right. And so by returning to that identity, not as body mind, not as the creature, the created, but returning our identity to that of spiritual, to that of the universal spirit there, we return ourselves uh, to oneness. We return ourselves to that relationship, that union with the beloved, with God. And it's by grace alone that happens, right? Our efforts to move forward are all about that. It's about realizing that it cannot be done by ourselves. We cannot move ourselves, but it is the grace of God that inspires us forward, and the acceptance of that grace through an infinite humility, right? Through a full surrender to the beloved, through which we find our true identity, our true self. And in that grace, we can approach with confidence the divine beloved. right? So he by himself alone and no one but he is fully sufficient, and much more so to fulfill the will and desire of our souls. Right. So, I in the church I grew up in, they used to always talk about that God-shaped hole inside. I never liked that idea, but there it is. Mother put it in my mind, so I'm repeating it too. That God-shaped hole, that basically our desire cannot be satisfied by anything in the material world, anything in the world of the finite and the changing. Right? We are an infinite self. We are a child of the beloved, of the nature of God. And for an infinite self, we require an infinite fulfillment which is found in God alone, an infinite fulfillment and immortal fulfillment, something that is not caught in time, space, and causation, is only the creation. That as spiritual beings, we need a spiritual food, something that does not diminish, something that does not have to be constantly eaten. The water that Jesus talked about to the woman at the well, right? He asked that a woman, what do you call a non-Jew? A Gentile. He asked that, I believe, a Gentile woman at the well to draw him some water. And she said, "Oh, who am I to draw water for you? I'm not a Jew." And then he makes that statement to, "If you had asked me for water, I would have given you the water which required that would take care of your thirst once and for all." Right? And we also have a similar statement by Sri Ramakrishna when he was that alcoholic husband that had beat his wife shows up to see him, or he want his I got the story all backwards. His wife, who had been beaten by him, comes to Ramakrishna in tears and asks him to be great to pray for her husband, that he might not beat her. And Ramakrishna says, "Well, tell him to come here and see me." And she says, "Oh, he'll never come here." And he says, "Well, tell him if he comes here, I shall give him the wine whose intoxication never fades." Right? That divine bliss inside, the knowledge of God, the communion of the divine. So he says, by God by himself alone, and no one but he, is fully sufficient, and much more so to fulfill the will and the desire of our souls. And our soul, because of his reforming grace, is wholly enabled to comprehend by love the whole of him who is incomprehensible to every created knowing power, that is, to the souls of angels and of men. I speak of their knowing and not of their loving. That is why I call their souls in this case knowing powers. Right. And so, really, I understand this to be that evidence that God cannot fit into the mind because of that the triad is missing, subject, object, verb. God is a unity. God is the one without a second. And so we cannot comprehend of that in mind. But when we understand our identity as beyond mind, that we're not trapped in mind in the world of changing, that we are created in that eternal image of God, the image of love, wisdom, and being. We come to know that, and when we identify that within the shrine of the heart, the cave of the heart, as St. John of the Cross talks about it, that in that silence there is a knowing that's not a thought, not a sentence, and cannot be expressed, cannot be named, because there is no limit to that notion of God, to the presence of God. And so it's by that we come to know. It's by that surrender of ego, which is the noisy mind that's constantly giving us a narrative of self, by separating ourselves from that narrative of the mind, the hungry mind that is trapped in the world of time, space, causation. When we give up that idea of ourself, the thoughts of ourself, and return to being, right, to return to the I am, which is the present moment, undefined, with no attribute attached to it, simply that inner awareness of isness, that which is obvious becomes apparent to us. We're able to know an inexpressible knowledge of God. Right? Now, all rational creatures, angels and men alike, have in them, each one individually, one chief working power, which is called a knowing power, and another chief working power called a loving power. And of these two powers, God, who is the maker of them, is always incomprehensible to the first, the knowing power. Right? Then this knowing power is the intelligence, which is kind of what forms the mind. It's interesting here that as I see it, Satchit Ananda, which is from the Vedanta, the Sanatana Dharma, as the essential essence of God, that love, wisdom, and being. Here he's listing two of those powers, one working power, which is called the knowing power, and the other one, which is the loving power, right? And we've talked about that. Simone Weil talks a bit about God as noun and creation as verb, right? We talked a little bit this morning in class about that verse in John, which I return to quite a bit, where it says the Word was with God and the Word was God, right? Word was God is unmanifest, right? Before the creation of the world, Word with God is God manifest, God expressing himself in the creation, through the creation. And of course, Jesus, and if you're open to the idea, the other avatars, the Rama and Buddha and Krishna, the other names that the world has remembered because of their love and their pure expression of love and wisdom, that those are the highest, the highest manifestation of God, the purest manifestation of God. Ramakrishna says that the avatar, or the incarnation, is akin to a hole through which God can be seen. So the whole means an absence, that Jesus was not an ego. Jesus was not a personality or person or place in time. He was an absence of that, a whole through the creation through which that infinite, inexpressible divine can be seen, the Father, God the Father. Right? So all creatures, all rational creatures, now interested, he says rational, that's relative, all creatures who have the ability to live in this relative world, right, where rationality really is the thoughts of mind, right, ration, and the idea of our relationship to the creation from one to the next, seeing ourselves separate and part and apart from the whole. So all rational creatures, angels and men alike, have in them, each one individually, one chief working power, which is called the knowing power, and another chief working power called the loving power. This is how we manifest. This is how what causes us to move and what allows us to grow, what allows us to move beyond our limitations, right? To transcend our unhelpful desires. And of these two powers, God, who is the maker of them, is always incomprehensible to the first, the knowing power, right? Because knowing power is the mind. And God, as we talk again and again, cannot be fit into mind because the mind requires any of the three triads in order to conceive of something: time, space, causation, or subject, object, verb, or past, present, future. Right. So everything that can be conceived of by the mind has to be subject to those triads, and God is not. All of this happens within God. God is everywhere present and always perfect, and the mind cannot hold that unity, cannot conceive of something that does not subject itself to time, space, and causation. But to the second one, which is the loving power, he is entirely comprehensible in each one individually, right? And that's the highest goal, to be completely merged in God through love. That was the last prayer of Jesus in the book of Matthew, just before the crucifixion, that this unity may occur, that we may be one in him as he is in the Father, and that oneness might be secured by a cord of love. Right? So it is our love of God that expands our nature, makes us one with each other, and binds us together in a unity. And in is so much that one loving soul of itself, because of love, would be able to comprehend him who is entirely sufficient, and much more so, without limit, to fill all the souls of men and angels that could ever exist. Right? And we know God is that love from the book of First John. And so it is that love that binds us all together, because that love, that divine love, is without limit. It's an unconditioned love. And that is where we find our confidence to renounce, to let go of this world of the temporary, to let go of egoism, to find the courage to let go of ourself, our sense of separation from God. That is often caused by the different fetters, the fetters of shame, the fetters of well, what the Christians would call sin, right? What the Vedantists would call ignorance, ignorant of our divine nature, our identity with body mind, which is believing ourselves to be limited and to be separate, forgetting our nature as the image of God. And so God, though, in this love, without a limit, can fill all, right? There is no limited quantity of it. To fill all the souls of men and angels that could ever exist. This is the everlasting, wonderful miracle of love, which shall never have an end. Right? So it's not only unlimited, it's endless. So it is if you give God qualities, it's we can give God manifest qualities, right? But God unmanifest is the full potential of all things everywhere all at once. And we can't give that qualities because any giving God a quality of any kind is a limit. And we know that God is infinite. He cannot be limited. For he shall ever work it and shall never cease to do so. Let him understand it who can do so by grace. Right? And so we do all of this practice, we do all of this meditation, we do all of this prayer, we do all of our repenting and our letting go and our renunciation and surrender. And why do we do it? How do we do it? Well, at first it begins in ego, right? First it becomes an effort on our part. And then there comes a point where we realize that it cannot be done on our part, that we are scattered and that we are, well, in some ways, weak and unable to accomplish this. And then we come to know, we come in contact with that divine love that's flowing through us that he just finished telling us about. And through that love, through a comprehension or a surrender to an infinite love, a love with no limit to it, a love that's not conditioned, that through that love, we find the inspiration not to be driven by ego, not to be driven by a hunger or a thirst or a lack, but to be inspired through a fullness, right? And we read this in Brother Lawrence. We talked about that on
Last night.
last night. I forget what we talked about these things last night, where we talked about Brother Lawrence, who was constantly looking to be punished by God because he felt like he deserved it, right? And he joined the monastery because he thought it would be like a boot camp and it might make a man of him because he saw himself as a klutz who failed in everything. And he said he found the experience of joining the monastery terribly unsatisfying because he said, despite his constant searching for a punishment and for a strictness from this angry God, he found only one grace upon another, one joy upon another. And at first, he couldn't trust that joy. He thought, this is a self deception. I don't deserve this. How can I be enjoying so much bliss, so much happiness in the presence of God? I'm so unworthy. Right. And so he was terrified at first. He thought that it was a presumption on his part, that it was an evil, that it was an ignorance. And he said, but it persisted until it began to fill him with such a joy inside that he had to come up with ways of hiding it, pretending that it wasn't there because it was causing trouble in the monastery. And so it's through this contemplation, this learning to trust, right? This is the nature of faith. These are the things that we have faith in. This idea of an unconditioned love, which cannot be seen in this world, right? Which we do not experience in this transactional world. And so through a faith in an unconditioned love, we lose our fear. And through that losing of our fear, we find the ability to surrender. We find the ability to drop into what looks like nothingness from the egoistic perspective, but which turns out to be the one fullness, which is that divinity, right? So let him who understand, who can do so by grace, for the experience of this is endless happiness and is contrary to endless suffering, right? Because the endless suffering comes from us, the infinite beings, trapped in the ignorance of being small and finite, thinking that we die, thinking that we're born, not knowing that we have been eternally in the company of the one divine beloved, right? And there's two ways of thinking about that. Saint John of the Cross talks about that unity, but he says that really that we maintain our separateness, and that all we do is we clean ourselves and become so pure, like pieces of glass, so that there's no evidence of an ego self, and it looks and you hold that glass up in front of the sun, and there's no refraction. It looks like it is the sun, but it's a piece of glass, right? And Ramakrishna alludes to that possibility also when he says that it's the devotion of the human being that puts God into a form, the love of God that makes him take a form for us, to us, in the form of our ideal. And he says there are places in the ocean where the ice never melts, right? And so the Vedanta allows for two ideas of this oneness. One where we do have that separation, but we are unidentifiable as separate because we have adopted or become or surrendered to the will. So there is only one will, and that is the will of the divine, which is really our will perfected, our will with me and mine, selfishness completely effaced from it, right? And so through that surrender, through that confidence in love, through that knowledge of, and faith in this unconditioned love, we find our union. We find our communion with the beloved. And this gives way to our endless, our eternal bliss, because we are of the nature of God, whose nature is bliss, is love, right? So we find that in him. If a man were so reformed by grace as to have constant control of the impulses of the will, right? He would never be without some taste of that everlasting sweetness in this life, right? So if you could stop being distracted from that divine love, from that divine presence within you, the presence of God, the presence of the image of God within, if you could stop being pulled into the senses, like Eve in the Garden of Eden, remember, and Adam as well, that they looked out at that fruit. So that means they looked through the senses, right, into the created world. They looked at that fruit, that forbidden fruit, and Eve went through that three-step process. One, she saw it as beautiful, so it was attractive. And if she had stopped there, it would be fine. It's fine to enjoy the created world and to see it as beautiful because it is the reflection of the divine. It has the genes of God in it, right? But she takes the next step and she thought, that looks like something I want. I want to eat it. I want it to become a part of me, right? It looks like it would be good for food, is what she said. And then the third step was she thought it would make her like God. And so, as soon as we come to understand that there is nothing out there in this created world that can make us like God, that means there's nothing out there in this world that can fulfill us. There is nothing that we can add to ourselves, that we are complete in and of ourselves as spirit. As soon as can come to that and understand that, and then reach inward toward the image of God, toward the presence of God, rather than outward for finite things, when that switch begins to happen, that we will never then be without some taste of this everlasting sweetness in this life itself, or without the full food and the happiness of heaven, right? So that's the diminishment of body and mind completely, and the return to heaven. It's actually the return to Eden, as it were, right? We conquer that flaming sword of desire at the gates of Eden. We conquer that desire by turning completely inward to a full surrender of the presence of the beloved, and we find within ourselves paradise, the presence of God, the union with God. It is his nature never to be without these impulses, so do not be surprised if I am urging you to this work. This is the exercise, as you shall hear later on, in which man would have persevered if he had never sinned, right? If you had never bifurcated your love for God into a love for the multiplicity, objects of desire out there, confusing them with God, confusing them with the power of fulfillment, if we had never done that, we would have simply lived in the joy and the presence in the garden, at peace, in bliss, in the presence of God, enjoying his company as he walked in the cool of the day, as we see in Genesis of the Bible. Man was made for this working, and all other things for his sake, to help him and to speed him on toward it. Right? This entire creation is built in such a way that it leads you to the divine, or can lead you to the divine. Actually, does lead you to the divine. I'll make that bold statement because nothing here is fulfilling. Your search continues. Right? You're not going to find what you're looking here, and so you'll spend your lifetimes looking for that something, and at some point you'll sit down exhausted and turn to God. That's why God created a world of constant limitations, right? Because he does not want you comfortable here. He does not want you comfortable separated from your ideal. And so, like I like to tell people, every blanket in this world is 6 inches too short. You don't have to try every blanket, just try a few of them, see that they are not fulfilled, they do not deliver the promise that they make. And if they do fulfill a promise in the moment, it is the pleasant and not the good, and it does not last. It ends up leaving you more hungry and needing more, right? So if you see this world properly, not through egoism and selfishness, but through love, you then see that's this nature of the world. And you see that it is trying to put your attention and your mind on God alone, so that it is you and the beloved alone and nothing else for you. Right? By this exercise, he is to be restored. Right? So we see that all the world's religions actually talk about man being a degradation of what he once was. In the Bible, it's Adam and Eve, that they made a choice to follow egoism, to eat the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil, and became degraded by that. And so he says, by this exercise, by this constant contemplation of the divine, letting go of all of these desires, letting go of yourself, of your egoistic identity as separate from the whole, you are restored, right? You find your true nature. You come to know who you are. You no longer live in ignorance. You're free. And for want of it, he falls deeper and deeper into sin and further from God. Right? So in the Vedanta, we have vidya and avidya, the two powers in this world, in the created world. Vidya, the power of light, is always moving us toward God. And so if we choose the good over the pleasant, right, that which is not temporarily enjoyable, but that which is good, that which is takes us toward virtue, toward oneness, right? That if we choose those things, then we move toward God and we will find our nature. If we, as long as we choose avidya, the things that take us toward the multiplicity, take us away from virtue or toward vice, if we, and vice really is just another, it leads us toward hunger. We start trying to rely on those things that don't fulfill us, those things that distract us for a moment, but do not repair us, do not fill us. If we constantly chase them and think that all we need is more of them, right? And we just start serving those addictions, they'll take you all the way into the dark, right? Further and further from God, further and further from your own self, right? Your world becomes a constant distraction because you can no longer stand to be alone. You can no longer stand in yourself because you've given up your dignity, right? You've given up your oneness, your sweetness within, and exchanged it for a constant search of something that could never give you anything back. And by perseverance and continual working in this exercise alone, without anything else, a man continues to rise higher and higher away from sin, away from those things that are not helpful. Really, sin is defined as those things that are not according to your nature, right? And we have one little difference here with many interpretations in that the nature of man is not evil. Adam was not always fallen. And so, even though we often say that the nature of man is sinful, this cannot be true, right? God, who is perfection, cannot create something that would be by nature evil, right? And so, Adam was not always fallen. Adam was perfect at one point, and that's the nature we choose to look at. And we return to that nature, right? Through this following of light, this following of vidya, these following of virtue, that leads us to the grace, the undeniable, unforgettable, unending, and unconditioned love that is the nature of the universe, the nature of God and beyond, and nearer to God. So take good care of time, therefore, right? He's saying, be diligent in this, therefore, and how you spend it, right? So look at your life. How are you spending your time? Are you spending your time in distraction, searching for things that are giving you temporary refuge, but are never adequate? Or are you spending your time trying to search out that which is unchanging within you, the presence of God, the nature, the reflection of God, the image of God? Nothing is more precious than time. In one small particle of time, little as it is, heaven can be won and lost. This is a sign that time is precious. God, who is the giver of time, never gives two particles of time together, but one after the other. Now, this is interesting because he's talking about a science at the time of this writing. At the time of this writing, the atom was the new theory of the smallest particle in nature, but they considered it to be a particle of time, interestingly enough. And so the atom, within the science of this time, was considered to be a particle of time. And so that's why he's talking here that these atoms, these particles of time, are never given to us two at a time, that it's always linear. It's one at a time. These things come to us. And how do you spend each particle of time that God gives to you? And so that particle of time that comes to you, how are you spending it, right? You are earnest in the things that you do when you don't have to do anything, right? And we want to be, Ramakrishna says in spiritual life, the most important thing is your earnestness and your sincerity. That if you are truly earnest in finding truth within yourself, if you are sincere in finding truth within yourself, then God himself will come and bring you home. Right. And so your sincerity and earnestness is most important. Spend your time in your quest for the divine, for that divine nature, for God. This is because he refuses to reverse the order and the regular chain of causes in his creation. Time is made for man, not man for time. Therefore, God, who is the ruler of nature, in giving time, refuses to anticipate the natural impulses in a man's soul, which is exactly equal to one particle of time. So it is that man will have no excuse before God at the judgment and at the giving of the account of spending of time. He will not be able to say, "You gave two times at once, and I have only given one impulse at once." Now, I hear you say sorrowfully, "How shall I fare?" Right? Oh my God, how am I going to do this? Since what you say is true, how shall I give an account of each particle of time separately? Right? Oh my God, I have to account for every moment that's been given to me. How in the world am I going to do that? Right? I don't notice most of them. I've squandered another bunch of them. And the few that I've actually been aware of, I've barely done anything good with them. What am I going to do? How shall I give an account of each particle of time separately? I, who am now 24 years of age, and never up to this day did I take heed of time. If I am to make amends now, as you well know because of what you have just written, this cannot be in any natural way or through any ordinary grace, that I should be able to control or make satisfaction for any more particles of time than for those that are yet to come. Yes, and more than that, I am well aware by experience that of the times that are to come, I shall no more be able to have control of one out of 100 because of my great frailty and spiritual slowness, right? My ignorance, my constant thinking that I'm a body mind that needs and wants temporary things and to find its fulfillment in a world of created things, of objects, right? How am I ever going to be able to account for this ignorance of mine, for these mistakes that I'm making. My reasoning is irrefutable. Help me now for the love of Jesus, right? It's that cry of the soul when we come to realize that it is by grace alone that this can be done. That cry of desperation, right? I was sharing this, I don't know when, again, one of these days this week, we talked about Swami Prabhupada saying that really the real meaning of spiritual practice, the real purpose of spiritual practice, is to exhaust you in the effort and to end in failure so that finally you are humble enough to accept an infinite grace, right? You've come to the point where you know, I have nothing, I can do nothing, I am at your mercy utterly, right? Which is the end of the ego, because it's the ego that is convinced there's something you can do to earn your way to your wholeness, right? Something that you can do to manipulate your way home. And so we do this spiritual practice, we make our efforts, we fail, we find ourselves unable. And in that desperation, we cry out, and the divine comes, picks us up, and takes us home. Because finally we've let go of egoism, that fruit of the knowledge of good and evil that separated us from God. This, for the love of Jesus, is very well said. For there, in the love of Jesus, is your help, right? That is your strength. That is the only thing that is of value within us, that image of God that created us, and this love of the Christ, this effort as God manifesting in the incarnation, as a whole through which He can be found, the only way that God can be touched, right? Love is so powerful that it makes everything ordinary. So love Jesus, and everything that He has is yours. By His Godhead, He is the maker and giver of time. By His manhood, He is truly the keeper of time. And by His Godhead and manhood together, He is the truest judge and accountant of the spending of time. Knit yourself then to Him by love and by faith, right? By love, because that is your divine right, your divine nature, and by faith in what? Faith in the nature of that love, right? Faith that that love is unconditioned, infinite, and available to you. That's where we find our confidence before God, before the beloved, is in that relationship, that pure love, and by faith in that love. And in virtue of that knot, you shall be a regular partner with Him and with all who are so well fastened to Him by love. That is, with Our Lady, St. Mary, who is full of all grace and in the keeping of time, and with all angels of heaven that can never lose time, and with all the saints in heaven and on earth who by the grace of Jesus keep time in perfect justice because of love. So you see that love is the one most important thing here. To find it as your nature, and then to surrender to that nature which is the image of God within you, right? So a lot of Christian speak here. We could reword this in many of the other styles, but it's the same message. Love is what we are. Love is our nature. God is love. The way home is love. That which binds us into unity is love. That which inspires us is love. That which allows us to let go of our errors and to transcend our smallness is love, right? Love, 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 love. Infinite, deep, perfect, healing, strengthening, inspiring, blissful, endless happiness, love. All right. So that is the summation here. So now where did I just let go of to make sure I don't get lost here? Look and see what comfort there is here. Understand it as a theologian would and get profit from it. But warning I give you above all others. I cannot see who may truly claim this fellowship with Jesus and his Holy Mother, his high angels, and also with his saints, unless he be such a man that does all that is in him, lies with the, let's see, let me start that sentence. It's a long one. But one warning I give you above all others. I cannot see who may truly claim this fellowship with Jesus and his Holy Mother, his high angels, and also with his saints, unless he be such a man that does all that in him lies with the help of grace to value time. Right? This is another way of saying what the Vedanta would say: be aware. Each moment, be aware, constantly be watching the mind, constantly be watching the body, right? To separate yourself from its dictates and its needs, which are always selfish, always looking for its food, for its attention, for its health, for its, right? And come to the image of God that is in you before body, before mind, which is the impetus toward oneness, absolute unselfishness, absolute love, right? And pay attention to every moment, right? God is the moment. God is the I am. He is the I am within you, right? All of the delusion, all of the ignorance that we're talking about is because we don't just stop at I am. We add a string of adjectives to it, right? We become identified with the created rather than the creator. And so we want to look deep within and let go of anything that is changing within us and hold to that which is unchanging, which is that divinity, that Satchitananda, that wisdom, that love, that presence that is God, right? Unless he be such a man that does all that in him lies with the help of grace to value time, so that he may be seen to be one who makes a profit on his part, little as this is, for the whole fellowship, as each of the others does theirs. Right? And this is that idea of holy company, right? That we all contribute, we all get together in our sangha, in our gatherings as spiritual people. This is where we are adding our part, trying to manifest that love. And so that's why I talk when you come to the center here, don't come to take. You take in your practice. It's in your prayers that you get fed. It's in your studies that you get fed. It's in your contemplation of God that you get fed. When you come to the congregation, to the church, to the sangha, to your spiritual fellows, you come here to give. The highest form of worship of God is the worship of God in living beings, through service, through love, right? And so when you come to a center on your Sundays or whatever days you come prepared to look to serve, right? Come in your butler's outfit, to stand in the corner, scanning the room, looking for opportunities to serve, to give. Pay careful heed, then, to this exercise and to the wonderful way in which it works within your soul. For when rightly understood, it is nothing else than a sudden impulse, one that comes without warning, speedily flying up to God as the spark flies up to from the burning coal. Marvelous also are the number of such impulses that can take place in 1 hour in a soul that is properly disposed for the exercise. Yet in one stirring out of all of these, a man can suddenly and perfectly have forgotten every created thing. And equally quickly after each impulse, because of the corruption of the flesh, the soul falls down again to some thought or deed done or undone. But what matter? For straightway it rises again as suddenly as it did before. Right? So this is that whole idea of keeping the mind on the unchanging absolute, the presence of God within. Don't be pulled into the senses, right? And if you manage to do that, you touch that divine love. You find that flow, that current of unending happiness which flows through you, actually motivates your deeds. And if you can be pure, meaning having no thought of me or mine, but turning your life to thee and thine, right? In that you find your bliss, which is the expression of your divine nature, the expression of the image of God that is within you. And if you can't maintain that awareness of awareness, you do go outward and you find the senses and you find that the objects of things that cannot fulfill pulling you, correct it. Just like Brother Lawrence says, if I found in the moment that I was doing something contrary to the will of God or contrary to my highest ideal, I stopped doing it immediately and just started doing the right thing. If I found I wasn't doing something that I should be doing, I just started doing it. I didn't give myself a hard time about it. I just returned to the task, put my mind back in the presence of my beloved, and went forward. Right? And through that, he became a saint. Through that, he became full of bliss, full of joy within himself. All right. So, in this, then, one can quickly understand the way of this working and realize clearly that it is far removed from any fancy or false imagination or subtle opinion. For all these are brought about not by that devout and humble, simple impulse of love, but by a proud, speculative, and over imaginative reason. Right? So, not diving deeper into mind, right, in the world of the limited, but diving deeper into the soul, that unity, that oneness, because one will bring you to love and humility, the other will bring you through egoism to arrogance and selfishness, coldness. These proud and elaborate speculations must always be pushed down and heavily trodden underfoot if this exercise is to be truly understood in purity of spirit. All right. So we'll stop there for today.